Good morning. Today I want to speak with you about what I think is perhaps the most important and the most personal long-term investment decision any of us will make in our lifetimes. And that is the process of saving and investing for our retirements. And more specifically, I want to speak with you a little bit about the Canada model of making those investments more effective, more efficient, and more sustainable. Now, I understand that retirement sounds like something an awfully long way away for most of us. As Keynes said, in the long term, all of us are actually going to be dead. But what I want to encourage you to do is see Keynes' remark not as a dismissal of the future, but actually a call to action to each of us to take the steps today that we need to ensure that our tomorrow is both sustainable and affordable. Now, I understand that saving and investing for retirement is an incredibly daunting task. But I want each of us to see ourselves not just as savers, but truly as investors. Because together, the total value of our pension and retirement savings is equal to about 90% of the world's total output every year. Individually, we are each microfinanciers, but together, we are macrofinanciers. We are collectively, potentially, the biggest investors in the world. Not only are we big investors together, consistent with the notions of the positive economy, we're actually very long-term investors because we're focused on our retirements. Now, the long term is perhaps the most important advantage any investor has. Why is that? Because it allows us to look forward to the horizon to see value and growth in the places where it has the most potential and look through short-term problems and crises like the ones we've experienced since 2008. That's incredibly important because for most of us, over the course of about 30 years of our working lives, we're going to need to save something close to the equivalent of a small Parisian apartment in order to finance about 15 years of retirement. And the fact is, between our pensions and our own personal savings, most of us aren't doing that. That's a huge problem, and it's one that we're seeing highlighted in headlines around the world, that we face a retirement crisis. But few of us are doing anything about it. It's a particularly big problem for me and my Generation X, because most of my people in my generation are coming toward retirement age around 2030, the time when most state pension funds are expected to become unable to finance their obligations. Now, the holes in our retirement system are not just at the state pension level. Most retirement systems rest on three pillars: state pensions, employer pensions, and our personal savings programs. All of these pillars are underfunded in most Western economies, and that's true here in France. The holes in the retirement system in France are equivalent to about 1 year's total income or GDP for the country. Now, if it's any consolation, most of the OECD countries are in more or less the same boat. It's not a problem that's particular to this country. Germany and Japan face the same kind of holes. It's worth asking then, how did these big gaps in our retirement system develop? Well, a few basic things occurred. We made over-optimistic assumptions about how long people would live, how little they needed to pay into their pension systems, and how much we could pay out. Now, to solve these problems and to fill these holes, there are three basic things we can do. We can either raise retirement ages, and that's being done in many Western economies and being received with a lot of protest. Alternatively, we can lower pension benefits, but I think to most of us, that feels like a betrayal. Thirdly, we can increase contribution rates, but that's going to be a big drag on growth in most countries where economies are already faring pretty poorly. So what I want to do is look at what is now called the Canada model of investing pension savings. Because I think it offers a fourth approach to overcome the problems all of the West face in ensuring that we have a sustainable and affordable financial future for both our generations and generations to come. Now, Canada has been a pioneer in pension development for a few centuries. We created our first pensions for refugees from the American Revolution. We created the first state pensions in North America and South America around 1870 when we provided pensions to public servants. And private sector and pensions followed closely thereafter. All of that was about 40 years ahead of the United States and a little bit ahead of most Western European economies. Now, Canada's pension system has been one of the most effective in the world at eliminating elderly poverty, which was endemic in most economies up until the middle of the 20th century. But Canada faced its own crisis in pensions in the 1990s. By about 1996, we realized that our state pension fund was paying out 50% more every year than we were receiving in new contributions. By 2015, right now, pension experts said that our state pension fund would run out of the capacity to cover its obligations. And so we undertook some massive reforms. We lowered the benefits slightly that people receive. We also increased the amounts that people have to pay in. But more importantly, we changed the way that we invest the savings of workers and citizens like you and me. We removed investment decisions from politicians and other actors who are driven by short-term considerations, like the electoral cycle, and we put those investment decisions at arm's length and under the supervision of skilled money managers with a mandate to earn the highest possible return, invest broadly across all asset classes, and do so while minimizing risk. A few years later, we also liberalized the rules on pension funds so they could invest anywhere in the world. That combination of reforms meant that by 2012, the Economist magazine recognized our pension funds as a new brand of institution. In many ways, they talked about a maple or a Canadian revolution, where our pension funds were not just doing retirement investment differently, but investment more broadly in a new way. And so what are the hallmarks of the Canadian model of investing pension assets? Well, it's worth noting that all pension funds have one big advantage. They are permanent and they're patient capital. So for people like us, focused on ensuring long-run sustainability and the health of our positive economies, pension funds are really ideal investors. They can look through short-term concerns and invest in true long-term value, and they can partner with entrepreneurs and emerging sectors in effective ways that private capital often can't do. But just as importantly, there are 5 distinctive things about the Canadian pension funds that I want to highlight to you today and underscore their importance as France and other countries like it consider how to fill the retirement gaps that are so critical to the future of all of us. First off, we've created some very large funds. Rather than having a smattering of fragmented asset managers, we've allowed funds to aggregate into quite large institutions. That means we can minimize costs, and it also gives our funds the opportunity to invest in assets and other high-yielding deals that would be closed to individuals like you and me and smaller institutions. As I mentioned earlier, most of our pension funds have followed the example of our state or national fund and separated the administration or the payment of pension assets from the investment of those assets. That means that they can invest in a much more considered and professional manner that is not driven or overridden by political concerns. And in most cases, these pension funds have adopted very transparent investment frameworks that are based on very careful considerations of diversification and transparent risk management, while at the same time allocating resources across the entire universe of assets. That's particularly important right now, 7 years after the dawn of the financial crisis. We have interest rates at historical low levels. That means that pension funds are getting squeezed in two ways. First off, the government bonds that they normally invest in are producing very low streams of income. At the same time, the future liabilities that these pension funds have to pay are inflated by the fact that the discount factor on future liabilities is the lowest it's been in over 40 years. So pension funds are getting squeezed on two fronts. They have higher future liabilities and lower current income. As a result, it's incredibly important that our pension funds have built dedicated teams of very skilled in-house professionals to invest these funds and at the same time manage them in ways consistent with best practice. So all in all, I think the Canadian model offers an approach to long-term investing of our retirement assets that's entirely consistent with Warren Buffett's adage that you shouldn't think about owning a stock for 10 years unless you're prepared to own it for 10 minutes. And vice versa. You shouldn't own it for 10 minutes unless you're prepared to own it for 10 years. I've just invested 10 minutes of your time in talking about the Canadian approach to investing pension assets and your retirement funds. As you go away today, I'd like you to retain one principal thought. You're not just savers for your retirement, you're also investors. And as investors, I hope that going forward, you'll invest in a way that's just a little more Canadian. Thank you very much.